Hey guys, and welcome to the Office 365 Pulse. Today we have a special guest, John White, who is going to be joining us. He is going to just join us on audio though, because just a couple of minutes before we did sound check, a horrible storm blew through his area, and he actually lost his internet. So he is tethering with us today, but he is still here. So. Welcome, John. Are you still with us today?
Oh, I'm here, and thanks, Jennifer. Happy to be here.
I love it. So, John, I would love for you to give a little bit of an introduction of yourself to the audience. I think this is the first time I've got to have you on the Pulse, so super excited to have you. John is going to be sharing with us. We're going to be talking about Excel services in the second half of the show today and what it means for 2016. So if you guys have pre-questions, or anytime we're going through the show, if you guys have questions for us, please feel free to put them in the questions section on your screen, and we will be sure to get through to them. So John, why don't you take it away and give us a quick introduction of yourself?
Well, sure. How long do I want to take? I'll keep it pretty short. I've been around the circuit a little bit from an IT standpoint. I started way back in the day with Novell NetWare and went up through Lotus Notes, did a little bit of Java along the way, and I've been with SharePoint for quite some time. I actually worked with SharePoint in the 2001 time frame,
Nice.
although
Tahoe.
yes, although not as deeply as I do now. I founded a company in the mid 2000s, 2006, called Unlimited Viz, which is where I am now, to focus in on SharePoint, and in particular, the business intelligence workload on SharePoint. At the time, myself and my business partner had kind of realized that although SharePoint was the next big thing at the time, that it was quickly going to commoditize somewhat like at the time Exchange was doing. So we needed to do something that had a fair amount of business value in it. And we chose BI and built a team around that workload, and we've been focusing on that ever since. And I was lucky enough to be awarded MVP in, I think it was January 2011. So heading off to my sixth MVP summit next week, where hopefully I'll get to see you, Jen.
Yes, I will be there. You are 1 year ahead of me. I just got my fifth. And
Ah,
I came on in October. So yeah, next week will be a fun week with all of the MVPs raining down in Bellevue for our yearly adventure.
it's always a blast.
Yes, definitely. Well, awesome. Well, I am so thankful that you're joining us on the show. A very dear friend of mine and Corey's, and we just love getting to hang out with you. I love that you're joining us on the show, especially on this show. So I'm hoping that we're going to just be able to answer everyone's burning questions about Excel services. But first, let's jump in and look at all of the updates to the roadmap. So I try to highlight what's been updated in the roadmap, pull out anything that is super crazy, like, oh my, we should all be paying attention to this. But to be perfectly honest, not that much going on in the roadmap this month. So I have a link here to the Office 365 roadmap, and then also Victor Weiland has a great blog post that comes out whenever there's changes to the roadmap, and it highlights everything that's been moved from from development to deployment, or something that's been moved from in deployment to canceled, and different things like that. And he kind of maps through all of that. And so I included the link to the latest post that he has there. To be perfectly honest, when I looked through it, everything that appeared to be going in to the roadmap was things that we've kind of already covered through blog posts, so I did not feel like there was really anything too crazy there this month. But if you want to dig into those additional details, those are some great resources to dig in and see that. So that's kind of what we have there. Nothing too crazy. The message center seemed to go a little bonkers though in the past couple of weeks. So it's about 3 weeks between shows now. So in the past 3 weeks, there's just been a lot of stuff hitting the message center, and a lot of it had to do with Yammer. And it had to do with Yammer and groups and new features, and we can kind of see through the list here. And I was actually a little bit confused or frustrated because I was seeing, there we go, because I was seeing groups being used as groups as well as groups in Yammer, and so I thought that was a little bit rough, a little bit hard to know, okay, are they talking about a group in Yammer or are they talking about Office 365 groups? And so there were two different components there. So lots of updates there. A lot of the stuff has been covered in the blog post already that they've done, but it's more along the lines of, okay, now you're starting to see this, you're starting to see some of those pieces that are going there. Also, this concept of praise. I don't know, John, have you seen this one yet or started doing this? This is where inside of people's profiles and stuff like that, you can give them praise. And it's going to send them off an email to let them know, and to your manager and the colleagues manager and stuff like that, and let you know that you're praising something that they've done. So that's kind of neat. That's hit my environment yet, but I haven't really seen too much of it. John, have you happened to see anything about that or have any thoughts on the concept of being able to do that?
Yeah, it's on my radar screen.
I think we may have lost John. At least I don't hear John, so I'm going to keep going and
Fusion
hopefully
between
it'll be.
Yammer and Office 365, like.
Okay, so I think John is having issues, which we knew that was potentially going to happen since he lost his internet. So I think he's going to try to dial in. So we are going to just kind of keep going through that piece there. Okay. Um, the group files experience is going to be updated to be much like the OneDrive files experience. So you're going to start to see the similarities across both of them. So that's very cool that that's coming. And then Dropbox integration with Office Online is going to be available very soon. So those are going through the process of getting deployed and released right now. So that's kind of what hits the message center for updates. Nothing major. It was all in the categories of things to be informed about if they're coming. So we've got a lot of those there. Nothing too significant. I'd say in the last 3 weeks there really hasn't been, even on the blog post, there's not a ton of significant updates and changes this week, to really discuss on the show, but we've kind of got the summary here for you guys. From the blog. So these are the updates from the Office 365 blog, and I went ahead and put them in categories this time, and I put them in the categories of Microsoft Office updates because there were quite a few updates that came out just to Office, and so I kind of put them together to make it easy to go through. But they've added a bunch of teacher requested features to OneNote, sharing with a click of a button inside of Office 2016. So if you had used a SharePoint site before and you were in a SharePoint site and you wanted to share a link or share a document, you just hit share, email it out to people, and then they'd have a link to it, different things like that. They're incorporating some of that into Office 2016 as well, so you can do that directly from Word. So really great sharing experience is coming inside of Office 2016. There's some extra forecasting and chart features that are available in Excel 2016. The Skype for Business preview is getting expanded to include some additional countries. So if you're not in the U.S., you can check that list and see if your countries are now being included in that extra release. There's an iOS app for Skype for Business. OneNote is also teaming up with 53, which is a pencil and paper company, and so pencil and pen company. Basically what it's going to allow them to do is a Surface Pen. If I draw a triangle, it's going to then translate that into an actual, structured triangle, and it's going to make those shapes super nice and easy to do. And then it's also with the Surface 4 pen. When you buy that, you can buy a tip kit, which lets you change the tips that are available on your pen. So you can get like a fine tip pen and a pencil, and there's these other tips that you can use. I have not got my hands on those tips yet. We're actually heading to the Microsoft Store tonight, so I'm hoping I'm going to be able to play with that a little bit. but that's now available, a new feature that they're kind of integrating that into OneNote. So if you're drawing shapes and stuff like that, you have that. Um, they're putting in some history inside of Office. So if I have a document and I'm working on it, I can click File History, and it's going to show me who's been working on the document. So it kind of goes along the lines of the sharing piece that's there. And then also, this one is the one that I'm super excited about. The Outlook app for iOS and Android is getting upgraded, and they're adding in a bunch of really great features. Most of it, especially for iOS, is about usability. So I don't know if there's anyone in the audience that is using Outlook for iOS. It's one of the things that I miss. So I've been an iOS, I've been an iPhone user now for probably 4 months, I guess. And I love having access to all of the apps, but Outlook is one of the apps that was superior on a Windows phone. And I'm excited about the changes. So I've seen some of the screenshots of what they're coming, and it's getting along much more in line with what I was used to and I had expected out of the Windows Outlook app. So I'm super excited to see those changes. And they've started talking about the sunsetting of Sunrise. Oh, that's a horrible play on words for that. That's not what I meant. But you know, the going away of the Sunrise application because it's going to all be incorporated into Outlook now. So I think, John, did you join us? I think you made it
I
out,
did.
right?
And I'd love to echo your sentiments about the Outlook app for iOS. It's fantastic.
Yes. So, have you been an iOS user forever, or
For
have
about
you
a
been
week.
just a week? Okay, and you were Windows before that, right?
Oh yeah, very
Okay.
much so.
That's what I thought. You were one of the last holdouts with me. I remember that.
Yeah, it's all about the apps at the end of the day is the reason I switched and it's not so much the availability of them, it's the maintenance of them. The apps on iOS just keep being maintained, they're better. And frankly, I've got the Power BI app on iOS, and I didn't have it for my Windows 8.1. I got tired of waiting for 10. So there you are.
Yeah, I've seen a few people be really excited about the Windows 10 phones. I don't even think they're out yet. I know they got announced, and they look really cool. And I will go back to them. I kind of have my
Hmm.
list of different apps that have to be there, but I basically have to be able to travel and
Hmm.
bank on a phone for me to go back
Hmm.
to it. You
Yep.
know, so as soon as we get back to there, and I'm thinking 6 months to a year after universal apps are kind of locked in, then maybe
Yep.
potentially with all the changes. So I know they announced the phones. I just don't think any of them have hit the street yet. So,
You can
and
buy
then
them.
another thing that
I think it's as of today you can buy them. I saw somebody tweet a picture of
nice,
them buying one, but I think they're pre-orders at this point.
cool. Well, we're going to, like I said, Corey and I are going to the Microsoft Store tonight after work. So maybe I'll get to play with them. I seriously doubt I'll come home with one, but I'll play with one. But
Excellent.
yeah, very cool. So I'm glad you're back with us, John. Um,
Well,
I'm
I've got my 1020 Lumia here, and it's now safe for me to put Windows 10 on it because I don't need it to be reliable. So
True. That
I'll
is
play
true.
with it.
That is true.
Yep.
Um, all right. So we have a couple more updates from the Office team. The first one is upcoming events. So there is a series that they did on the Office blogs, and it's Master the Art of Stage Presence with James Whitaker. And it was just a very good presentation. If you're someone who is just getting started giving presentations, even someone who's a seasoned presenter, and you know you feel like you've got um, some skills there. I watched probably the first 10 or 15 minutes of it, and then I had to move on, so I saved it for something I want to go back to when I have more time. But he's just giving excellent instruction on how to present stories and present ideas, and he just does it in a very fun way. So I highly recommend checking that out. Other upcoming events is Ignite has moved. So Ignite is now, let's see, I had the dates up just a second ago. Ignite is in September 20th or 26th through 30th in Atlanta, Georgia. So Ignite has moved from Chicago to Georgia, and you can pre-register now to get in there. And so you're going to be able to see the Office team, see a lot of different speakers and presenters, and it is going to be an excellent time, I am sure. But it did move from April or March, whenever it was, to the end of the year. So Um, I'm not sure how I feel about that. I'm glad it's not in Chicago, so I guess I'd rather have Atlanta over Chicago. So it's all good, right?
Well, it spaces the conferences out a little bit better, that's for sure. So from an announcement standpoint, it kind of makes more sense.
Yeah, definitely. So we'll just roll with it. We'll roll with it. They didn't call me and ask me what I wanted, so I'll just roll with it. The other piece is Office Mechanics, which was the Office Garage. Then it became the Office Mechanics show. Jeremy Chapman is kind of the head of that. He's the one who does most of the shows. It is now becoming Microsoft Mechanics, which is a really sweet thing because they do the quick little 2 to 3 minute clips, new features, talking about good things coming out of Microsoft. They have direct access into the team that can make a difference. And so Jeremy Chapman and his crew, they are going to become Microsoft Mechanics, and it is going to include everything Microsoft. So I think there's 2 additional people besides Jeremy that are kind of heading it up and leading it out. So I think that's super exciting. So just a great set of resources. They come out with like a new show like every couple of days or something like that, and it's posted all over. They usually blog about it. You can find their channel and get their information. So definitely a super great resource for you if you're just trying to stay up to date to the Microsoft voice, because everyone who usually presents on their show, it's all about Microsoft from Microsoft. So it's a good perspective to have, and then you can balance it out with the rest of the things that you're reading. The fast track is continuing to evolve. So there's some fast track items on the roadmap that are coming. And what they've basically said is that fast track, when it first came out, was really viewed as a one-time thing. So you use the fast track to get your jump start. They're going to fast track you to being deployed and being successful with Office 365. Well, now they're turning it into more of an ongoing feature that you can go back and use for different workloads. So there might be, different pieces that they're going to be turning on fast track features for, so that you can go work with and get that. And so you can go directly to the onboarding center. You can work with your partner of choice and work through the fast track to get those resources available. You qualify if you're 150 seats or higher inside of Office 365. So they've kind of talked about how the program is changing, and then we'll start to see what the changes are going to be probably in the next few months as they make more specific announcements of what additional programs are available. Okay, just a couple more changes. These are pretty quick updates, but Office 365 is now available in India data centers. So there's local data centers in India. So again, if you're in India or have a company in India or something like that, it's now available. So that's a really awesome thing for Microsoft to be able to provide that. And then also there's a compliance program is now publicly available for financial services customers. And so what happened is Microsoft had made available to a small group of financial service customers some extra compliance features and had really helped them use Office 365 to manage their compliance needs within their organization. And so what they're now doing is making that program available to any to any financial services customer that's eligible. Again, it's going to be greater than 150 users. Those companies can contact their Microsoft rep and get put into this program, and this program is going to give them access to specific resources that are going to help like for their specific needs. So direct access to Microsoft security and compliance staff. So they're going to get some extra access to resources that they wouldn't have otherwise. Request paid on-time support, different things like that, but very deep into a specific function that they can get. So this is a very cool set of features that Microsoft is making available. All right, and then finally, I guess not finally, there's a couple more.
That 4 o'clock would work perfectly. I'm actually on a call right now until 4, so that would be ideal.
Okay, so, all right, audit reports. So we have some updated audit reports.
Nope, that's going to work just fine.
There. And then we have got different pieces that are there. So the Compliance Center just keeps updating with different reports that are there. So data transmission and encryption, security development, life cycle, and data replication and backup. Those are all pieces that have been enhanced with the latest bumps that roll out. The reporting in the Compliance Center, I think we're in like in every 2 weeks, they're bumping out new reports and new pieces with it. So if you haven't been in to see that yet, here is the Compliance Center. So you can go in and see different things that are there. We can go in, look at our e-discovery, look at retention, permissions, data loss prevention, all of these different things. We can go in to this location now and create those policies and do different things that are there. All right. The Office Lens has been updated for iOS, so they've just put some more features in there, specifically that you can go directly to OneDrive and different things like that from Office Lens. And so that app has been updated for iOS. I'm super excited about that as well. And then finally, the last big update that we have is that Microsoft has been recognized as a leader, I think for the 7th time, in the social software quadrant. I find this one interesting. John, are you guys a big Yammer user at all?
Yes. Very much so. Not only are we Yammer users, we have a product that does analytics on Yammer for large organizations. So yeah.
Got it. So to you, you're probably not that shocked at all that they're a leader in the quadrant.
No, not in the least bit. I mean, it's certainly in our space, we've got some pretty large customers using it with an awful lot of messages in their corpus. So yeah, I'm not at all surprised. All of the very big name customers that you might think of using it, basically, and if you're using Office 365 and you're a large company and you're looking for social networking, it's almost a no-brainer.
Right. Definitely. Awesome. Well, those are kind of our updates. And so what we're going to do now, that's really, and I'd say over the last couple of weeks, there hasn't been anything super major announced. Like lots of nice, small little features, but nothing nothing that made me go, oh crap, that's awesome, or wow, they finally released that, or check it out. So nothing like that. At least, from the stuff I shared, I'm like, it's cool and it's neat to be there, but I kind of expected a little bit more after a couple of weeks, but I think it's the season. So I think we're constantly seeing changes, so we'll just keep watching it. We do have some case studies. I love how at the beginning of the month we don't have a ton of case studies, but then at the end of the month we get like a ton of them. So we have about 4 different case studies. The F1 team that does a lot with Office 365, they did another addition to their case study. They kind of have a whole collection of things that have been done with case studies, as well as Roads and Kingdoms of Japan. That one was kind of cool because they created like a sway. They worked with a company that I think is owned by Anthony Bourdain or associated with, and so for those who don't know, he's the guy that travels around the world and eats all the crazy food. Either Bizarre Adventures or something, maybe. I don't fully know what it is, but he goes out and does that, and so it's kind of like different foods and locations and things you can do all across Japan. So a very cool resource, and it's delivered through a sway. So very, very cool stuff. Okay. So then next up, we are going to transition and jump into the question of the day. Now this one has been fun. This one has been fun because I remember the day that Microsoft made the announcements with the blog post that says what has been removed or depreciated from SharePoint 2016. And John White, I don't remember, were you at SP TechCon Boston?
No, I wasn't. No, not this year.
That was the day that it got announced. And so I'm giving a session about building simple dashboards where we're using Excel services, and we have to talk about, okay, and we just had this email, and so it was definitely a fun it was definitely a fun morning answering those questions. And so I was so happy, John, that you were able to come to our um, when you were able to come do the show with me. I am so excited about it. I loved your blog post that I read when it said "Don't panic." I
Yeah.
thought that was like the best um, thing about it. I tried to get some information about it to answer questions about what's going to happen with existing stuff and different things like that, but I would love to kind of take an opportunity and maybe you can walk us through the scenario of what's going on and what the announcements mean and just kind of walk us through it, and then we can ask some questions
Sure.
from the audience. If anyone in the audience has questions as we're going, and kind of put them in there, and we can kind of get to the bottom of what is happening with Excel services in 2016 SharePoint and what does it mean. And so one question that somebody has already posted, Sean has already posted, is that when we're talking through it, if we could, when we're talking about things, is there a difference between SharePoint Online and SharePoint On-Prem and Excel 2016 versus Excel Online and different things like that, so we can just make sure that we kind of talk
Yeah.
about what products that we're talking about so we don't cause any confusion.
Well, yeah, and it's the naming that's caused some of the confusion, if you ask me, too. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was quite funny. I mean, what you experienced. I mean, they dropped this deprecation document without really providing a whole lot of context. So, you're going through this document. Okay, that's all right. That's out. Excel services is gone. Really? Which makes the heart jump into the throat a little bit, because I don't think I'm the only one who's invested in Excel services out there. I think there's an awful lot of organizations. They've had it in the product since 2007. My goodness, what are they thinking? Taking Excel services out of the product. They're not. The bottom line is, if you've used, down to distinguish between on-prem and online here, from a SharePoint standpoint, if you're using SharePoint Online, this has already happened for you. You may not know this, but it's happened for you. They don't use Excel services in the cloud any longer. It's all what we used to call Excel Web App, but now is called Office Online Server, and that's the other part of the naming problem. So when they put this post out there, and the post, if you go to it today, it doesn't read quite what it read then. They didn't really mention much about. They basically said it was already replaced with Office Online. It was going to be replaced with Office Online Server, and they left it at that. They didn't explain what that was, because that's a new name. It's a new name for Office Web Applications. But those who don't know that think, oh my goodness, now I'm going to have all my Excel files up in the cloud, or I'm going to have an Office 365 account to use all of this. And that's not the case. What they're doing is moving the core of what was Excel services into what used to be Office Web Application, now Office Online Server. And again, they've done that in the cloud already. So all of the things well, I shouldn't say all of the things, but most of the things you know and love about Excel services are simply moving over to that platform.
Okay.
Now that raises some interesting architectural questions. Well, what does it mean for this? What does it mean for that? But that's fundamentally what's going on. The way that most people experience Excel services is either opening an Excel file within SharePoint, and chances are they're actually using Office Web Applications when they do that anyway, unless they've run some PowerShell to enable Excel services to function.
Right.
But they normally experience it through the web part, the Excel web part, where you can surface items from within an Excel an Excel workbook on a page, and drive that with filters and things like that. So and that holds. That's going to work moving forward in the brave new world. So that's at the end of the day, there's nothing really to worry about. It's a logical progression. I mean, up until now, I've had to explain to people, what's the difference between Excel services and Excel web application? Well, it's this, and well, if you have both, you do have to run this PowerShell to get things like slicers to work in Excel, etc. If you want to use Power Pivot for SharePoint, you have to turn off Excel web access for viewing in a SharePoint form. So now that won't be a problem. We're just going to be able to stand up an Office Online Server, and it will perform the functions of Excel services for us.
So will the Excel services web parts, where you can pass in parameters and do connected web parts and select something in one and it redraws the chart in another.
Yes.
how will something like that be handled in this new world?
It's based, so when you do it today, it's simply a web part, and it's making a call into the Excel services back end when you're using that web part. That call is simply going to go into the same interface, but now it's running on the Office Online server. So that brings up another question. Excel services has a fairly robust API layer that you can call into with REST, SOAP, what have you. That's all moving over as well to the Office Online server. So they're basically layering that technology with the same APIs that we're used to. So it should be, in quotes and underline, transparent to everyone. It's just a simple matter of now you're calling into a different destination.
Okay, so the dev story, everything that you could do today in Excel services, you in theory should be able to do tomorrow. I mean, I know they're not launching it tomorrow, but you should be able to do in the next version when it becomes available. It's just going to be called something different?
Within reason. Now, it's not just called something different. It is different technology. It's a different architecture. So Excel Services has always run as a SharePoint service application on a SharePoint server in your SharePoint farm. Starting with the 2013, Office Web Applications, now Office Online Server, needed to run on its own server or farm of servers, and that farm could serve not just SharePoint, but it could serve things like Exchange and Link, now Skype for Business, whatever that may be. So you may have a single Office Online Services farm that's serving up different farms within your organization. You may have multiple SharePoint farms, but a single Office Online farm. So that you were moving that service application from there to the Office Online Services farm.
Okay. What are some of the benefits that this is going to bring to the experience or to the farm or to just why? I mean, what are some of the things that we could take away that would maybe say, why are they doing this?
Well, it's like as I mentioned before, it's a little bit less confusing. That's one thing. Now, there's some other implications to doing it too. Frankly, it's easier for Microsoft because they've got a single architecture that is going to be serving this stuff up. It's what they're doing online, and therefore, that's what we're going to be using on-prem if we're going to move this forward. So they don't want to move the Excel Services product along. So it does make sense from a logical standpoint to have that bundled into that farm. So we could optimize. Let's say if we've got I've heard of large organizations having an Excel services farm. Well, that would just be replaced now with you wouldn't have to have a separate SharePoint farm for that. You'd simply have that as your Office Online farm. One potential benefit, and no one's announced licensing or anything like that yet,
right,
but Excel Services was always an enterprise feature within SharePoint. The Office server simply requires an Office Pro license for everyone. So if you've got that, it may reduce the need for a SharePoint Enterprise license, but that's just me speculating. I really have no knowledge about that whatsoever. So that might be a benefit for, I don't want to tell everybody they're going to be able to do that.
So I should not be tweeting that John White said.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, you can tweet it for what it's worth. I mean, if John White said it, the Microsoft didn't say it. One of the differences, I don't know if you've noticed online, but when they switched away to Office Web Apps, or at some point in the past, at least in a lot of the tenants I've seen, certainly in ours, the default file size limit for an Excel workbook has gone from 10 to 30 megabytes. In SharePoint Online, and obviously Office, I'm getting the terminologies all mixed up. Office Online Services, you can't change that limit. So the fact that it's gone from 10 to 30 is a good thing. On-prem, you've always been able to change that limit for Excel services. Right. You can also change it for, I'm assuming you can change it for Office Online Server because you've always been able to change it for Office Web App Server. But it's had that same default limit of 10 megabytes in size. There's a few things that aren't making it over. The concept of trusted data connection libraries, where you put your ODC files and have an administrator bless them. That's highly secure, but it also, it gets in the way of users getting things done. It looks, and I don't know this, I haven't been able to play with it hands-on because not all of the functionalities out there in preview
Yeah,
yet.
that's what I wondered, if some of the new functionality was even in the beta bits yet.
Yeah, I've gotten it. I haven't. I've actually not stood up the new server because a lot of the BI capabilities aren't available yet. They're going to be coming from the SQL team.
Got
Things
it.
like Power Pivot and reporting services. Although some very interesting reporting services news came out about an hour and a half ago. So, but yeah, there's things of that nature are going away. At least according to the deprecation document, they are. And you mentioned developers are going to be able to do everything they used to be able to do. If you're an admin developer, maybe not. The PowerShell commandlets for Excel services go away. But again, that just makes sense because there's a whole set of PowerShell commandlets for Office
Now,
web applications.
wasn't there a specific thing with Excel services where if you were on-prem, you could go in and configure the refresh rate, so you could get almost real-time refreshes, but you can't necessarily do that.
Well, we can talk about refresh if you want. Sort of, yeah, and that remains to be seen how that's going to behave. There is a setting in your Excel workbook that controls how often you go back to the source data. So if you've got a data connection in your workbook and you want to open that workbook, what data are you going to see? You've got a few options. When you work with Excel and you've got your data retrieved into whatever your visualizations are, and you save that to the disk, that doesn't change. If you don't have Power Pivot for SharePoint installed, there is no mechanism that's going to update that file as it sits on disk. So, for example, if you crawl it with a search index, you're going to get the data that was in that workbook the last time it was saved. You can open that workbook and interact with it and get new data loaded in, but when you navigate away from that workbook, it's going to still have that original data in. All you were doing was playing with data in memory. You have to actually open the workbook and save it back in to have any of those refreshes persist. So there are some settings as to how data will refresh when you have the workbook open, but that still is only affecting you in read-only fashion. So you can have, the most common setting, the one you're describing, is on open.
Right.
And that's a setting you would set in the workbook. You have to have turned on within Excel services. And that basically means whenever I open that workbook in my browser, it's going to go back to my data source and update my visualizations for me immediately. I don't have to hit the refresh button.
Right.
That works like a charm unless you have massive amounts of data, and you don't want that user to have to wait. There is a solution to this problem. There's a couple of solutions to this problem, but if you don't want to buy a third-party product, you can install Power Pivot for SharePoint and get your workbooks updated that way. That's really the only way to do that for you. So my assumption about this is going to be that those refresh options that you set in the workbook are going to be respected by the new Office Online Server.
Okay. Okay. That's good to know.
And today, by the way, the Office Web Application Server doesn't handle data connection to the back end, whether it's analysis service, whatever. You do need Excel services for that. So that's, again, consolidating.
That was one of the things that I had gotten a lot of questions about. So you're thinking there'll be some type of change that makes it respect that?
Yes, yeah. It just makes sense to bring that code base from Excel services into the Office Online.
Okay, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I guess it's one of those unknowns that we'll kind of see what actually happens. But Ricardo was asking about differences or what's gone, if there's anything new, specifically around the ability to read and write to an Excel workbook via code.
So via code, I can't address that I've never really messed with that in terms of anything new. In terms of anything gone, they've stated that the existing APIs will continue to work. You can read and write with code through those APIs, so that should continue to work. One of the big differences, again, between Excel services and Office Web Application, now Office Online Server, is that Office Online Server allows you to both read and write in the browser to a workbook. Excel services only allowed for reading. So you could state that I'm going to be able to now not only read those files that have, say, data connections and interactions like slicers and pivot charts and pivot tables, but I'm also going to be able to edit them so I can save those changes back in to the file. Previously, I'd have to open that up in Excel, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, that's one of so that's from a UI standpoint. Through code, I really can't address that. I don't know the answer to that.
Okay. What are some of the biggest misconceptions that you've heard about this? Like when you've talked to people, like I know you wrote the blog post, and I can't believe I didn't link to it in here. So I will update this and put the link in there to your blog where you kind of talk about it. But what are some of the things that are just causing people to panic the most about this?
So it's going away. That's the first thing. And once they get past that, okay, it's not going away. It's moving to Office Online Server. Well, again, this is partly due to the language. It's called Office Online. Well, online, that means it's in the cloud, right? So the biggest, to my mind, the biggest misconception is you're going to force us to have an Office 365 license to use Excel services now? What's going on? And no, it's simply in John's opinion, poorly chosen replacement name for Office Web Application Server, which itself was a poorly chosen name.
Yeah, so it's Office Online Server that's going to be deployed on-prem.
Right, because of course SharePoint Online is Office 365's version of SharePoint.
Yeah.
But so calling it online means Excel Online, right? Yeah, it's simply the on-prem server that gives us web access to the Office applications, and that's all it is.
Have you heard anything, or do you know anything about what is going to happen in the process of upgrade? Like if I have all of these Excel services web parts all over, and I'm trying to upgrade.
So the official documentation on this is sketchy, to say the least. But however, I can make a few certain assumptions, and just based on the way things work today, you can have an Excel workbook in just about anywhere in SharePoint in a library. You can have a Power Pivot workbook in a Power Pivot gallery, but that's just really another document library. And when you open that workbook, the server knows to call into the Excel services. Well, now the server is just going to know to call into this other service. So I would anticipate pretty much zero upgrade from a content standpoint, so from your Excel file standpoint. If you're heavily using things like trusted data connection libraries, there's probably going to be some work you're going to have to do. Embed the connection documents, or put them, take them from central admin, which is what's going on with in some cases, and put them now out in your site collection. So I'm not going to say it's going to be zero pain, but from an actual workbook standpoint, you shouldn't have to do a whole lot of work. I would not expect, but again, that's just me theorizing.
Okay. Yeah, and I guess it's one of those things that we won't know until we know more.
We won't. And one thing that might be instructive is if we look at what's happening in the online space, especially with Power BI. And it's probably worth just chatting about that here for a bit.
Yeah, definitely.
In the online space, Excel services is available, or now Office Online Services, but you can do the same things with a workbook within the 10 megabyte constraint. Or if you've had Power Pivot over the last couple of years, that limit can go up to 250 megabytes. Did I say Power Pivot? I meant Power BI over the last few years. So that was basically a V1 of Power BI. We now have a V2 of Power BI, which is standalone. It lives outside of Office 365, but can reach back into content in Office 365. Specifically Excel workbooks. And in there, in Office 365, it's worked just like it has on-prem. Your Excel workbook can be in just about any SharePoint document library that you want it to be, and it will get rendered up. Well, with the new Power BI, the only way you're going to be able to work with the Excel workbooks in SharePoint Online is if you have it in a OneDrive, either a personal OneDrive or a group's OneDrive. So circling back to the discussion about groups before, each group gets a OneDrive. If you put workbooks in there, that you can surface those workbooks within Power BI dashboards. I've heard talk of being able to surface content from on-prem workbooks into Power BI. I don't know anything about that yet, but I would assume something like that would be employed. I don't know, the concept of OneDrive doesn't really play on-prem except from a, my site standpoint. So I don't know exactly how that's going to shake out, but that's the way they're handling that, allowing us to now surface items from within Excel into Power BI. And by the way, you're going to be able to surface, go backwards. You're going to be able to embed elements from Power BI in SharePoint pages, from what I understand.
cool. Have they talked through the mechanisms that you would do to actually do that yet?
No, the PASS Summit is on right now. It just opened today,
Got
and
it.
they're talking a little bit about that stuff, and they've talked a little bit about the embedding and the way you can embed Power BI items with basically filter parameters on a SharePoint page. I've had discussions
cool.
and stuff with people. Yeah, like the web part. So so the content, it shouldn't really matter where the content is. One thing that I was quite excited about, veering off topic wildly, today is the ability to have reporting services reports show up in your Power BI dashboard. That with the new community technology preview of SQL Server 2016, you can do today.
Nice.
So, yeah, that was just announced.
That was your infomercial voice. I like it.
Fantastic.
Awesome. Well, people in the audience, do you guys have any other questions for John? This is one of those areas where no question is silly.
Oh, no.
So if you're curious about what is going to happen in your environment and how things are going to go down, it'll be interesting. I mean, I know people who have used Excel services, and I've taught classes on it and done it about how you can use Excel services and passing parameters to build, you know, connected web parts and pages and all of that. And I mean, I do have concerns as to what is going to actually move over versus what is going to have to be touched. So that upgrade question is really like, yeah, I can do all my new stuff a new way, but am I going to have to go back and redo a lot of work? And it kind of sounds like that's still to be determined. Like, are we going to have to run some cute little upgrade checker and it is going to spit back a list of oopses, and they're not even really oopses because you did it the way you did it the only way you could do it, but now are you going to have to redo it for this new world?
I'm kind of optimistic because they did it in the online world. They did it to us SharePoint Online, and I didn't notice.
Were they running Excel
nobody
services?
noticed.
Were they
What's
running
that?
Excel services online and then they switched over to?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah. Somewhere in the last 2 years. I couldn't tell you exactly when it was because I didn't notice. But
okay.
Yeah.
That's hopeful. That's hopeful. Maybe Debbie Downer should just have a better attitude today.
Well, given with what you've been through the last couple of days, I don't doubt I can understand your reluctance.
Yeah, Debbie Downer needs better attitude. I'm working on it. I'm working on it.
Outstanding.
Goodness. All right, audience. We have got 12 minutes left. So come on and give us some questions if you guys have them. Okay,
I should jump in as well, just to complete the picture. Oftentimes, Excel services is really just a platform for Power Pivot for SharePoint, because you need Excel services to render out these models that you've created in Excel. So you've got an Excel workbook and it's got Power Pivot. You need Power Pivot for SharePoint. Again, in the online space, that's provided for you. But we start talking about this. This is where I'm really interested to see how this plays out, because Power Pivot for SharePoint is another service application that runs in SharePoint, and it requires Excel services. How's that going to be deployed? I don't know the answer to that because it's a SQL product, SQL Server product, and it's going to ship in one of the upcoming community technology previews or updates to it from the SQL Server team. And so is that going to be something we run on our Office Online server farm, or is that going to still live in SharePoint, call into the Office Online server farm, which then in turn calls back to the content SharePoint? I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah,
but
that could get interesting.
That's going to be interesting. This is also one of the side effects of having the SQL team and the Office team in different buildings and rarely going for coffee together. But yeah, so both Power Pivot for SharePoint and reporting services ship on the SQL disk. So that's on a different release cadence. But one of the good pieces of news that I can share, because it's public, is that the next version of Power Pivot for SharePoint, assuming they still call it that, will support Power Query refreshes. Today you can't do that. If you build your Power Pivot using Power Query, which you should if you want your workbook to work online, et cetera, SharePoint, the current 2013 version of Power Pivot for SharePoint will not refresh it automatically. You will have to do that manually yourself.
Got it. Sandra has a question that I love. What a great question.
Let's hear
It
it.
says, Power BI, Power Pivot, Power Query, what is your favorite tool? Oh,
What is
and
my
why? I
what is
added the and why.
my favorite tool? Well, I've been focusing pretty heavily on the new version of Power BI for quite some time, probably the last couple of years, and in its original incarnation. But this summer, at the end of July, they released the new portal with the new visualizations, and
Yeah,
it's
that was pretty sweet.
sweet. Then there's a product when you have that, and you can use it for free. Sign up. All you need is an Azure Active Directory account, which if you've got Office 365, you have. You can sign up for it and use it for free for an awful lot of use cases. One of the tools you'll get there is the Power BI Designer, and that's kind of interesting. They wanted to reduce or eliminate the dependency on both Office 365 and Excel to be able to do business intelligence work. So although it'll still leverage those things when you have them, you don't need them. So with the Power BI Designer, it's a client-side application that's going to run on your PC that is essentially Power Query, Power View, although we're not going to call it that, and it's not what we've traditionally come to know as Power View, and Power Pivot from a model editing standpoint and a data model, all just within a client. So it's basically Excel with all the add-ins, but without Excel. That's what I like the way I like to put it. But that'll run on your client, and you can save a file off and share that with people. But you can also do all of this stuff within a browser. Everything's HTML5. The visualizations are based on D3. You can change them. You can build your own visualizations, put them out into a gallery to your heart's content. It's pretty exciting.
Cool. What are you missing out on if you don't buy the advanced version of Power BI?
Power BI, there's a few things. I don't remember if I did a blog post on this or not. I think I did. It would have been about six or 7 months ago. The big differentiator, so there's size limits. So your total capacity of data goes from 1 gig to 10 gigs. You get 1 gig for free. And that isn't for any one model. You still have a 250 megabyte model size limit no matter what version you're using. That's the back-end service right now. Any sort of on-prem data access requires a pro license. So if you're working with cloud-based data or Excel workbook data that's sitting in a OneDrive, you can do free. But if you need to go through a gateway to refresh your data, or the SSAS connector to do live connections to SSAS backends, which is also pretty exciting about Power BI, that's going to require a pro license as well. And finally, yeah, the frequency of refreshes. These are the big ones. For free, you can refresh your data once per day, and if you get a pro license, you can refresh it up to 8 times per day.
Okay, cool. One question. This is a really good question from Umar. It says, we used to have dedicated servers for Excel services only. So now when we're talking about performance, high availability, scalability, and different things like that for Excel services. So if you're in an environment where you need to have highly available, scalable performance, are you now going to have to be focused on your instances of OOS and doing it that way? Yeah,
that's really the answer to that question is yes. But that's also true for today in an Office web application farm. If you want to have high availability for that service, you're going to have multiple farms. Now, admittedly, if you want to have high availability Excel services, now you got to maybe scale up that farm where it was less important before. The ability to render Word in a browser, or edit Word in a browser, maybe wasn't that important, but now it becomes more. Matter.
That went away.
That's right. That's right. So it may be a reason you have to implement high availability too. So that's a bit of a downer. But hey, maybe you don't have to be as mission critical on the SharePoint farm itself. Right? You might be able to reduce. You may have had an Excel services farm that was for availability reasons. You're just going to laterally move that now over to the Office Online Server farm.
Okay. A couple more questions. Is there a good roadmap that illustrates all of these, Power BI, Power Pivot, et cetera, and how they interact for someone who's a visual person to kind of understand those different pieces?
Not that I'm aware of from a
You
concise
should get one,
one.
John.
Yeah, maybe I will. If you crawl over my blog for the last year, you'll probably be able to pick it together. I wrote something back in February. It's a Power BI. I think the title of it is Power BI Now with Enterprise, and it walks through quite a bit of the new Power BI model with an eye to that. What's new and why is it now appropriate for enterprise? Because frankly, it is.
Right.
The original Power BI service just wasn't, and this one just is if you use it properly. But yeah, you're right. Maybe I should. Maybe that's a thought for a blog post. I haven't written anything since that one that we're talking about today, which was just before I went on holiday in September. So
Yeah.
I get back on that horse.
And then finally, I think for the last question that we have tonight is, with the Pro Edition of Power BI, if you want to access an on-prem data source at a high level, what is involved to make that gateway work?
So there's two things here. There's gateway, and then there's a connector, and it's a bit of a different thing. The gateway today, there's what's called a personal gateway, and anybody can run this thing. You don't need any special permissions. If you have access to the back-end data, you can install this. So it can be running on a laptop under a desk. You don't even need admin rights to your machine to be able to do it. It will run as an app. But if you do have admin rights, it'll install as a service. So you'll install this, basically the shim. You can get that right from the download section in your Power BI portal. You get that up and running, and then all you have to do is create your data source that's pointing at the back-end data, whether it's an Excel workbook or a Power BI desktop file, or just go into the Power BI desktop service and specify that the SQL Server or whatever the back-end source is through Power Query. And then it's going to be able to do a refresh of that data. So you go get the data from the on-prem data source, and it's going to populate a model within the service. And then you work with that model and build the visualizations.
Awesome.
So you can either do it that way or you can do it offline. If you have the SSAS connector, with the SSAS connector, it's different. With everything else, what you're doing is you're populating a data model within the service from data somewhere else, whether it's in the cloud or whether it's on-prem through the gateway. With the SSAS connector, you own the SSAS server, and those visualizations that are out there in the cloud are pointing back in a live fashion to your SSAS box. So when you run a visualization, you run a query, hit a slicer in the browser online, it's actually sending the query back to your SSAS server on-prem, and then the result gets sent back up to the browser. And that's just yet another, it's basically another one of these shims that runs on a machine that's inside of your firewall. So you don't have to open up any firewall ports or any of that. But that SSAS connector is what makes this service now appropriate for the enterprise. They both, as mentioned, require a Pro license, though.
Awesome. Very cool. Well, John, thank you so much for coming today and sharing this. We'll probably invite you back to do a follow-up once we, hear more from the SQL team, know what's actually coming. Maybe after you're able to do some upgrades, you can come back and show us and talk to us about what is
I can't wait.
the reality. What is the reality?
I can't wait. I think we're going to learn a little bit more over the next couple of weeks too. So, we'll see what happens. Yeah.
Very cool. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. A couple final announcements. We've got the Office 365 Yammer group where you can go in, join the network, and ask colleagues and coworkers different questions about Office 365. A great resource, great access to the Microsoft product teams as well. Also, a special thank you to IT Unity and Planet Technologies for providing us resources to do this webcast today. And so we have our next one scheduled for November 10th, I believe is the date. I can't believe I always forget this when I'm ready to go, but I believe it's November 10th. It's our next webcast, and we are going to do, this is so funny, John, you'll laugh at this, we're going to be doing a review of the Surface Book. John laughs. For those of you that don't know, I got a Surface Book and Corey got a Surface Book. Corey's is working, and mine. I don't think Surface Book is a bad device. I think I got an absolute dud. because you leave it alone for a minute and you come back and something's broken, and the next minute something else is broken but it's different and the other thing's working. And so I definitely got a dud. So we're going to take it back to the store tonight. We're going to see what comes of that. But Corey's is working, and so he's going to have been using the Surface Book for a couple of weeks. We're going to have a camera set up so we can kind of show the device and then give you guys honest feedback about, why would I maybe want this device versus another device and different things like that. So that is going to be November 10th. We're an hour earlier that day, but information about that, and you guys will be able to go back to itunity.com/office365pulse, and you should be able to register for that. So thank you guys all so much for coming out to today's show, and we look forward to seeing you guys next time. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Jen.